Welcome to the 7.5 notes. We are going to be talking about how to solve rational equations. And there are two main methods you can use to get rid of your fractions in order to solve the rest of the equation. I'm actually going to start with method 2, and that is called multiplying both sides by the LCD. You want to use this method when there is a plus or minus in between. So if you notice, these have a minus in between, the other one has a plus, etc. And what you're going to do is multiply by the LCD to eliminate the denominators. Only on the top. So, for instance, as we look at this first one, we're looking for something that we can basically multiply 3 to get to, n to get to, and 6 to get to. And that is 6n. 3 and 6 both go into 6, and then you need the n at the end. And what you're going to do is multiply by 6n on the top of all three fractions. And you're allowed to do that now because it is an equation. We couldn't just multiply on the tops before because it wasn't an equation, so it didn't have this part. So we had to do the same thing on top that we did on bottom. Now, as long as we do it all the way across on both sides, it works. So what happens is, over here, 6 divided by 3 is going to be 2. So basically I have 2n times 4, that's 8n. And because 3 goes into 6n, this crossed out and there's no denominator left. Then over here, the n's cancel out. And I have 7 times 6, which is 42. And over here, the 6's cross out, so I just have n. So the whole idea is that by multiplying by the LCD specifically, you cross out the denominators, because we've now multiplied by something. This is still the equation that we started with. It's just been multiplied by 6n. And this is the same thing as if you had like x over 6 equals 12. You would multiply by 6 here and here to get rid of it. You're doing the same thing, it just needs to fit all three denominators. That's why you need to find the LCD. Then I'm going to subtract this 8n from this 1n. That crosses it out over here. Negative 42 equals negative 7n. And we're going to divide by negative 7 on both sides to get n equals 6. Let's do one more of this method, and then I will show you the other method. Sometimes the LCD is a little bit more obvious. Your only denominators on this one are 2 and k, so your LCD has to be 2k. It has to have the whole thing. Okay, and I am multiplying by it each time. You don't have to write your multiplication dot if you don't want to. You can. Then start crossing stuff out. The k's cross out, so I have 6. The 2's cross out, so I have minus k. And the k's cross out again, so I have 24. And now I have an equation that does not have any fractions left, so all I'm going to have to do is subtract the 6. It is a positive 6 right now. The negative is on the k, not the 6. So that's why I have to do minus 6. Negative k equals 24 minus 16 is 18. And then divide by negative 1 on both sides. Now let's talk about cross multiplying. So this method can only be used if there's only two fractions set equal to each other. Fraction equals fraction. If there is a plus or minus in between like this, you can't use this method. This is sort of like a shortcut. First thing I'm going to do is show you how to do it this same way over here, and then I'll show you what the shortcut is. Just because if you don't want an extra rule to memorize, my LCD would be x and x minus 6 multiplied together like this. And if I put that on both sides, because there's only one fraction on each side, the denominator it already had is going to cancel out, like that. So this ends up being 7x. It's always going to end up with the opposite denominator. Then on this side, the x and the x cancel. So these two end up getting multiplied. That is cross multiplication. I'm going to come back and solve this one in just a second. Here's the shortcut. You can just multiply these two and multiply these two. Now notice how I did distribute this 4 to the r and to the -1. That's why it's now 4r and -4. That's the shortcut to this. But really all you're still doing is this same thing. It's just a little bit shorter and simpler. Now let's finish solving. On the top one, I need to multiply that 4 all the way through. Now we're going to subtract this 4x. And divide by 3. On this one, whenever you see this variable squared, that probably means you are going to have to factor to solve. What that means is I need to get everything on the same side. And basically these are both going to move over here, but as they move across sides of the equation to the opposite side, they have the opposite sign. So if I want this to move to the opposite sign. This moves, opposite sign. Now I need two things that multiply to +4 and add to -4, which I know sounds a little confusing. They're both going to be 2, and since we want them to add to -4, they're both going to be -2. And then r equals 2. So even though there were two factors, they both had the same answer, so there's only one answer to the equation. Moving right along, we're still going to cross multiply over here. But the left side gets a little crazy because you have to actually multiply out m plus 3 times m minus 2. However, on the other side, 8 times 3 is 24. So here I'm going to have m squared. And then hang with me for a second. This one's going to be -2m, and this one's going to be 3m. 3m minus 2m is +1m. And then 3 times -2 is -6. You just need to make sure you do this times both of these, and the 3 times both of these. Moving right along, this equals 24 right now. I need to subtract that 24 so that it joins everything on the other side. So I get m squared plus m minus 30. So -6 minus 24 is -30. Then two numbers that multiply to -30, add to 1. Because again, you have to factor whenever you see that squared. It's 6 and -5. Which means your answers are -6 and +5. Because your answers to the factors are always the opposite. Alright, the one on the right gets a little tricky. This one has multiple fractions, so I'm going to give this a denominator of 1 right now. That's the first part that's a little tricky. The second part is I can't really see what my LCD is until I factor this. So if you're trying to find a least common denominator, you have to have everything factored first. This is difference of squares, meaning square root of 4 is 2, so it's going to be p plus 2, p minus 2. And you'll notice that this one already has the p minus 2. So for my least common denominator, you just need to have both of them. You don't need to write the p minus 2 twice because it's in both of them. It just needs to go there once. So if they have anything that's the same, you only write it once. So I need to multiply by p minus 2 and p plus 2 on every fraction. And then remember how we canceled things out up here? We're going to do that before we actually multiply. So the p minus 2's cancel. And sometimes I will split this up like this into the 3 fractions so I can keep track of them. You can do that too if you want. This is going to be p times p squared. P times 2 is 2p. And then here in the middle, nothing cancels because there's only a 1 down here. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to go ahead and take 2 times p plus 2. And then I'm going to leave the p minus 2 on the end. And I have to actually multiply this together. Don't forget there is a plus sign in front of that though. And then the nice thing on the last one is the p plus 2's and the p minus 2's all cancel, so it just equals 8. And then I have to actually multiply this all together. So I'm going to get 2p squared negative 4p, 4p, and negative 8. And now I just have to combine my like terms. So my p's cancel, right? And I have p squared plus 2p squared, that's 3p squared, plus 2p minus 8 equals 8. And then I have to subtract that 8 so that it joins everything else. And kind of draw a line here. I end up with 3p squared plus 2p minus 16. Now, this one has a number in front of p squared, so that means you have to multiply to negative 48 and add the 2 in the middle. Well, negative 48 is negative 6 times 8, which adds to 2. But you don't go straight to the parentheses. You split it up in the middle. Like that. Over here, you can divide both of these by 3p. And you have p minus 2 left. And over here, you can divide both of these by 2. And look at that, you have p minus 2 left. So you have 3p, you have p minus 2, that's the parentheses that they have in common. And the outsides is 3p plus 2. So your final answers are going to be 2 and negative 2/3. Okay, this does not happen very often, but I am going to go ahead and mention it. This one is not actually an answer, because if I plug 2 back in, it would have made this 0, and you can't divide by 0 in math. So that one is not actually an answer. It's just this one. And I'm not going to give you too many examples like that. I just wanted to make sure that I informed you that that's a possibility, because you might see it in the future. Okay. Last 3. We're going to knock them out really quick. These are both cross multiplying. Boom, multiply by 3, 6a plus 3. Boom, multiply by 7, 7a minus 56. Subtract the 7a to the left side, and subtract the 3, so that moves to the right side. And we get negative a equals negative 59, which really means A equals 59. You can either think of that as canceling out the negative on both sides or dividing by -1 on both sides. And that's it. Cross multiply over here. Y squared plus 5y means we're probably going to have to factor 3y plus 24. And then get everything on the same side, so we're going to subtract both of these. The only thing you're actually allowed to combine, first of all, those cross out, is 5y minus 3y. That's 2y. And then you need two numbers that multiply to -24 and add to 2, which is 6 minus 4. So your two answers would be -6 and 4. And both of those work in the denominators, so you're fine. You just don't want it to make it 0 because you can't divide by 0 in math. This one does need to be factored a little bit. You can take away a 3 as a GCF on the first one. So then I have the W minus 1. That's part of my LCD. That was a terrible W minus 1, but that's W minus 1. And then I need a number that 3 and 9 both go into, which is 9. And that is what I'm going to multiply by on the top of each one. 9 W minus 1. 9 W minus 1. And 9 W minus 1. Okay, and I'm just going to kind of cross this one out because I got replaced it with this anyway. So my W minus 1's cancel. And 9 divided by 3 is 3. Then 3 times 13 is 39. Done with the first fraction. Minus. My W minus 1's cancel. I have 1 times 9, which is 9. Equals. My 9's cancel. W times W is W squared. W times -1 is -W. This is actually 30. 39 minus 9. And then I'm going to subtract that 30 over to the other side so that now it equals 0 and I can factor. Two numbers that multiply to -30 and add to -1. We did +1 earlier. It's -6 and +5. So my final answers are 6 and -5. Here is the thing as you are solving these. This idea and this idea remain the same. Just pay attention to whether there's a plus or minus. If so, you have to use this method. If there's just one fraction on each side, you can cross multiply. Solving it is going to require factoring if you end up with a x squared, w squared, etc. Otherwise, you're just solving it like normal, like this one.